Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar series. And during this Women's History Month, it's extremely a great pleasure of mine to introduce Dr. Gail Christopher and also Heather McGhee, who I'll briefly introduce both of them, and then we'll really get into it here. I thought it was very fitting to have a mother and daughter dynamic duo, I'd say powerhouse team of this kind to share some interesting and important and insightful. I think we're very much in need of insightful perspective with all that we have going on in juggling in this day and time. So Dr. Gail Christopher is the former senior advisor and vice president for the WK Kellogg Foundation. And she is currently the executive director for the National Coalition for Health Equity and is a wonderful esteemed board member of the Children's Environmental Health Network and a longtime mentor of myself. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Nse.
Yes. And Heather McGhee, also quite esteemed. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Heather, for the first time, but hearing so much. And actually, my husband and I are big fans. We've been watching you for years and very much appreciating your perspective and balance in a lot of media conversation. She served as the past president of Demos. She's an American political commentator and is widely reviewed very highly for years now, and just helping to balance out a lot of important perspectives on equity and economic balance and perspective, especially when it comes to, the well-being of everyone, but especially the most vulnerable. So again, such a pleasure to have you, Heather, with us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be with you.
Excellent. So we're going to jump right in here. My notes real quick. All right. So Gail, I thought I'd start with you, and then I've got a question for Heather, and I think the rest of them are just pretty much us all collectively. You feel free to jump in as the spirit moves you. So you're both change agents in a variety of ways. Gail, your expertise in the social determinants of health and well-being, along with the pioneering work to infuse holistic health and diversity concepts into the political sector programs and policy discourse, continues to be, in my opinion and many others, quite critical. As the visionary and architect behind the Truth Racial Healing and Transformation effort, what have been the most inspiring and challenging aspects of your work to date?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. I'm excited to have this interview. My most challenging and inspiring, I think, has been to keep the focus a visionary one. There is so much pain, and there is such I'll just be gentle and say a storied racial history in this country. But I know in my heart that we won't get to, as some would say, the promised land until we create a vision for that. And we really begin to believe it, right? That we can share our common humanity and value one another equally. And so getting people to come together across racial groups and gender identities, et cetera, but getting people to come together and learn that that is our way forward together, that was truly my most challenging work. And to see it happen, though, is very inspiring and comforting. And I guess I would also say that not giving up in the face of criticism is also a challenge, because you have each person has to sort of step into what they consider their calling and their way, and not necessarily everybody's going to be supportive of that, So staying the course and not giving up has also been a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that. All very important perspective and truth, for sure. As the kids say, facts. Heather, as the former president of the inequitably focused think tank Demos, you drafted legislation, you testified before Congress, you became a regular contributor to shows like Meet the Press and Real Time with Bill Maher and many others. And I definitely want to congratulate you on your best-selling New York Times book called The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. What are some well-deserved. And I know you're still working to get that out. It's fantastic. And by the way, I'll be reading it next week on my spring break. And I look forward to that. What are some of the important lessons we all need to be aware of regarding the false choice that seems to be before us and always provided in our society, between some of us being okay and many more of us being better off?
Oh, that's such a good question, and you know, I should say that in the Sum of Us, I include a chapter about the environment and climate, and that's not my background area of expertise. Most of the book is about the economy, and yet I felt compelled as a new mother who was actually nursing my son when I read the press report about the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report that said we have 12 years to address climate change to ward off the worst impacts. And you know, there was definitely a sort of before that and after that in terms of how central this issue became to my thinking about our entire system. And so I do include a chapter in the book in the Sum of Us called The Same Sky, which talks about, I would love to know what you think about it. It talks about climate change opposition, or you know, opposition to taking action on climate change. And because the thesis of the book overall is that racism has a cost for everyone, and that many of the areas in society where we have not been able to make the progress that our people broadly need and deserve, the resistance, the opposition, the problem can be traced to racism. And so I didn't know, setting out in my research, if climate change and environmental degradation had that link. I knew from 20 years of working on the economy that all these different issues, from student debt to healthcare to poverty wages to the lack of collective bargaining, had that link. But so, you know, I went, asked the questions, did the research, and one of the things that I discovered on the environmental injustice piece was that even though it is so true and so clear, as is the case with systemic racism and institutional racism everywhere, that, you know, the impacts are felt first and worst by people of color, right? The target, the aim hits its target. And yet these sacrifice zones that we talk about and that so many of us live in, there's spillover from the sacrifice zones, right? That you can't actually, it's an illusion, the idea that you can shunt off all of the burdens and costs of uncontrolled pollution onto just one side of the environmental tracks, as it were. And that we do live under the same sky. And that in fact, as so many different researchers have shown, if we didn't have so much segregation and division, we would have more collective power to take on the polluters and control pollution for everyone. And that in fact, white people who live in segregated cities have more cancer-causing pollutants in their air than white people who live in more integrated places. They have less than the Black and brown people in their city, but they have more than if they lived in a place where there weren't these divisions. And so that was a real light bulb for me. Obviously, it was a real lesson in the fallacy of the zero-sum thinking and the need, obviously, to listen to communities that are bearing a disproportionate and unjust burden of the excesses of our industrial system, and yet to not allow for the false belief to be perpetuated that anybody is safe in a society that poisons so many of us.
Yeah, again, a lot of truth. That false belief is just right. And when you think about, and I very much look forward to reading the whole book, and I'll definitely pay attention to that chapter. And thank you for including that, because I think that is missed a lot when we do look at the whole picture of one's health and well-being, wellness, mental health, all of it, right? But the just transition piece is going to be interesting also for this administration. So we stopped the pipeline work, and maybe, you know, hopefully we stop some other very directly awful work that's happening in communities and has been happening. How do we transition those communities that are making their living wage, and many of them good salaries, if you will, from these industries that are also polluting? That psychosocial dynamic is definitely a deep one. So there's so many layers of that, but really appreciate that important perspective, Heather. So for all of us now, we're all mothers who only want the best for our children, and all children, I would believe, and we want to support and nurture them and protect them. How has motherhood elevated your perspective and thinking when it comes to advancing the most vulnerable?
Mom, do you want to start?
No, you could start being a new mom.
You're a young mom. You're not a new mom.
All right. You want me to start? Okay. Actually, it was motherhood that launched my life's work. It was the loss of my firstborn child. I didn't know the phenomena of infant mortality and maternal mortality as a thing back then. This was many decades ago. But as I was trying to get some answers and figure out what was going on, and I learned that it was, very almost common for women of color to lose children, in the first year of life, and even a more dramatic loss of life for mothers, due to complications of childbirth. And so it was really the gift of my firstborn that made me say, oh no, we have to fix this. We have to create a better way forward for African-American families. And so that really inspired my work. Even the fast forward maybe 5 decades later, when I was with the Kellogg Foundation, our mission as a foundation was to help children thrive, particularly the most vulnerable children. And we took a serious look during the strategy phase and realized that this was 15 years ago, most of the children in America were then and are now children of color. And a disproportionate number of these children are facing the hardship that comes with inadequate family income and all the vicissitudes that are associated with a racial hierarchy. And so we as a foundation back then realized that we had to put overcoming racism at the center of our work, if in fact we were going to fulfill our mission, which was to assure that all children would thrive. And so in a sense, you could say this focus on children has been, my life's work. And I was blessed after the loss of my firstborn to have 2 amazing children who have lived well into adulthood and who do amazing things with their respective gifts. And that seems like an appropriate baton to pass over to Heather.
Thank you, Gail.
Oh, thank you, Mom. And thank you, Nse, for that question. I did a TED Talk about a year ago, and my mom was there in the audience. And it was lovely. And one of the people who spoke before me was the leader of an organization called Madre. And her TED Talk was about thinking like a mother, and that if more of us thought and acted and voted and behaved in public with the instincts and the wisdom and the experience that motherhood gives you, we would be a better society. And I was like, I buy it. Sold, I thought that was a very powerful way of thinking.
Yeah.
I do think that being a mother has helped me listen better. It has helped me be more efficient with my time, because everything I do that is not with my son is, needs to be quick, needs to be done quickly, needs to get back to him. It's made me in some ways, very much more ambitious for the change that I want to see in the world. Absolutely. As I said, it put the issue of climate change, well into the center of how I spend my own time and advocacy and resources. And then it's also made me just deeply protective of life and completely intolerant of abuses of power and abuses of children. And, it's made some of the things that are, that I've always been opposed to and appalled by, right? It's not, it's not like I had some huge awakening that the world was unjust by any means. This is the work that I've been doing, coming with a good heritage on it for my whole adult life. But just on a visceral level, it's made the cruelty with which the powerful so often treat children, whether it's, at the border or in prisons and jails or in schools and neighborhoods and communities and homeless shelters and, you know, drinking poisoned water and all of that. I mean, it's unthinkable. And I think about how the coalition that should be thinking like a mother, that should be voting like a mother, that should be acting like a mother, is weaker than it would be because it's divided by race, right? If women were really united politically and in terms of our advocacy in the world, we would be an unstoppable force. And yet race is still a division where, you know, millions of white women, you know, choose their race over their gender in terms of, you know, this is a reductive way of talking about it, but I think there is some truth there that, you know, millions of mothers are not voting like mothers, right? They're voting like wives, and they're voting like white people, and that has created, that is kept in power an ideology that is willing to sacrifice so much of our children and from our children.
No, excellent. And we always try to aim to be a voice, not the only voice for children when they otherwise cannot be that for themselves. But your point about the power of motherhood, and nothing against fathers, right, who are standing up, of course, but this is a different kind of intuition, right, and a different type of nurturing that only mothers understand as that young life is in the first environment, their mother's womb, right, which we know sadly babies are born pre-polluted. I even hate to bring that up, but it's a sad fact. And then from there, it only escalates, especially depending on your zip code, your race, social economics, all of that. So I'll definitely look for that TED Talk. And I've listened to both of yours because Gail, you have one or more. It's you know, you guys are just old hat to the TED series, but no, thank you for that. A very important piece of advice for all of us. Think from a lot of these perspectives: rulemaking, policy making, standard setting, threshold levels. That's when Gail and I first met on the Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee at EPA. EPA is the regulatory public health agency of the country. I've said many times, I'll say again, the last administration defaulted, just walked away from that responsibility. And now this administration is working to clean it all up. And Heather, as you said, basic exposures to clean, healthy, accessible water. It's a basic human right. Clean, healthy, accessible food, air. These are things that are non-negotiable, right, for health and well-being. So appreciate all of those points. So kind of circumventing back to a little bit of some of the earlier conversation about the interconnectedness of a lot of what we are living through and have been living through. This is nothing new by any means, but especially the year that we've been in, because all of us have never really lived through the pandemic, public health type of pandemic of this size. And with the natural synergies between COVID-19, inequities of many levels, which we've kind of touched on initially, and climate change I'll throw in there. Because again, what we do see, and many have started to write about this, and I've been speaking about this a lot this year, those same frontline workers who have no choice but to go to work right now to help support all of us so that we can at least have our basic necessities are many times those same frontline workers who, again, are in harm's way, are feeling the brunt of climate, are maybe living in zip codes, which traditionally also have some of the highest heat index waves that we're seeing, the highest flooding, the highest drought considerations, which again, speaking briefly on the migration, we know that a lot of the migration patterns from our Central Americas and Southern tiers are certainly related to climate implications among crime and other things. So when we look at the interconnectedness of all these realities, it's a lot to digest. It's a lot for the average American. It's a lot for youth who are leading many movements in the climate resilience and justice realms. But when we look at especially our Black, our Brown, and Indigenous poor children and how they're doing this year and the ramifications of what this year and beyond will be for them and their families and their journey in life. What do you suggest that we, groups like the Children's Environmental Health Network and many other child health advocate leaders, consider looking at, not allowing to fall between the cracks when we think about the indicators of health and well-being when it comes to our most vulnerable within the child health population?
It's
a heavy question, sorry.
It is. I'll start. I do want to say though that that thinking like a mother metaphor or reminder or guidance, it reflects certain capacities and skills that emerge very prominently in motherhood, through motherhood, right? Not every single mother, but generally speaking. And that is this amazing capacity for empathy and compassion. And in addition to, you know, the things we need to do in the public sphere, we need to develop those capacities in our society because we are missing those capacities, as is evidenced by the inability for our country to really pull together to overcome, you know, this pandemic in an efficient and effective way. I think some of the studies have said 400,000 of the 600,000 deaths were not necessary had we moved forward in this moment of crisis together as a nation. And I know we had a unique situation, an anomalous leadership moment or occupancy of the leadership structure. That said, though, people were too easily manipulated toward a total disregard for one another. And so I think the work of developing at scale the capacities to have empathy and to have compassion and to ultimately create a culture in which we do share a common humanity and we do believe in the equal deservingness of one another. We must create a cultural shift in this country because we are an experiment in democracy. And we know that an experiment in democracy depends upon the collective public will being galvanized, if it's going to succeed, being galvanized for the greater good. And that's why I have so much appreciation and awe, really, of the analysis that Heather has done in her book, because she's found a way to create that frame of thinking. And it has kind of taken the cultural conversation by storm in the sense that, yeah, we are in this together. And yeah, you know, we're hurting ourselves, right? So however we do it, however we develop this innate or allow this innate ability, because I think it's in us, you know, to care for one another. I think we have to be intentional. We have to go about that in a very specific way. And we have to do it with a level of energy and focus that we've never done before in this country. This is a moment for a complete and total cultural shift, the actual development of an ethos of the capacity for caring and for having empathy and compassion. We know compassion begins with self-compassion. So it's a learning, but I really think in addition to all the things that this administration is trying to do to achieve equity, and they are throwing trillions at so many areas where they are needed. You know, I'm very proud of this administration. I'll leave the details to Heather to talk about, but in order to sustain that change, we have got to bring about the cultural shift that has been missing in this country.
I mean, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. I really agree in so many ways. That's why after nearly 20 years in the think tank sector, working at Demos and then running it, I did leave to write this book to reach out to people who were not reading think tank reports and who were not going to be, you know, tuned into the political press, but who in fact, and this was a choice that I made in writing The Sum of Us in a way to make it more readable and appealing and feel more like a good yarn than something that, you know, you have to kind of steel yourself to read and something that, you know, was full of facts and figures and sort of numbing and confusing. I wanted the book to reach beyond the choir because I do believe that we need to do the cultural work around beliefs and expose the false beliefs at scale. I'm not at all saying that this book is reaching scale, but it is. It's certainly reaching more people than were reading the think tank reports that I was working on. But I will say that, you know, there's a time and place for policy too, you know, and this certainly actually is the moment for policy. It's not an either or. The decisions that are being made right now in Washington with the extraordinary movement that is happening to address these longstanding inequities in our society, to address the current pain, but to build back better, as the president and vice president say, is an incredible opportunity. We saw with the American Rescue Plan that you can cut a check and cut child poverty in half. You know, that's, I mean, that means that child poverty was a choice, right? And that we are no longer willing to make that choice, or the people in power are no longer willing to make that choice. And that's a wonderful thing. And the fight to make those things permanent, the fight to go back and do more infrastructure spending that really focuses on the green transition that is necessary, and then focuses on the human and care-based economy. It's just exactly the way we need to be thinking. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I think a huge part of what you're both saying, it's one thing to have the paradigm shift, which is necessary and vital. And I think I have yet to see in my lifetime, but you know, we'll see. Then how do you sustain it, right? So the true systems approach is not just one leverage point, it's making the true impact to the entire system, which I would say we have an economy that's dependent on the production of chemicals which make us sick. That's just a hard reality that has definitely happened since the Industrial Revolution. We've all benefited from that revolution. And certainly now we are seeing every day increase in data that shows us that we are being harmed, especially our youngest who've done nothing to be a part of this economy. So anyway, I think that continues to give us all additional marching orders forward and pathways with this administration and all the other places where we hold influence, and all of you listening. It can no longer be the status quo. The way we've been going is not going to work. Our climate is telling us, our bodies are telling us, our mental instability, if you will, is telling us, viruses are telling us, right? We've got a lot to do here. Now on education, which is a whole nother set of TED Talks on its own, but we do know that's one of many indicators of success, or likelihood of success, if you will, when you talk about a young life navigating through their educational system and the many barriers to that. So when we think about, again, the most vulnerable within the child health population, what do you all see as being primary, again, non-negotiable actions that we need to really stand behind and get serious about as a society if we truly do appreciate and respect our young children and what an education, and I even mean before kindergarten for those that are able, but really that foundation that then can set you off for your trajectory in life?
Well, I think we need to do a few things. We need to see education from a multi-generational perspective, where we recognize that it's not just about how we fund schools, which obviously, you know, we need far more equity in school funding. We need to de-link property value from the value of the education that we provide to children. That is just a given when you realize how racist our property structure is, how Black families were deliberately denied the opportunity to own property for generations. And so then tying the education of their children to that racism is just totally indefensible. And we obviously need to undo the shift from, at the higher education level, we move from grants and public funding to loans and private debt. And we need to obviously reverse that, because that has disproportionate impact on, you know, the new generation of adults who are more likely to be brown and Black, but it also is impacting 6 out of 10 white borrowers as well. It is no way to run a country, this debt for diploma system. But I think we also really need to think about education in a more holistic way, in both at the youngest levels. You know, it's been announced that the administration is going to fight for paid family leave, which is enormous in terms of maternal health and infant well-being, as well as pre-K, universal pre-K across the country. Again, you know, enormously beneficial. But it's also true that, you know, things like the child tax credit, which are going to pay people with children $300 per child per month for the costs that the inordinate costs of raising a child are really important to the economic security of families and will allow people a meaningful choice about how much to work and how much to be at home, which has been a choice that's only been reserved to the richest women and parents in our society. And that is huge. And we need to recognize that anti-poverty measures to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, to expand Medicaid in the states that have not yet expanded, now that the American Rescue Plan includes even more free money to states to do the right thing by their people. All of those things create the possibilities for families to thrive together. We can't, in a way that so often happens, the bad guys demonize our children. The good guys just want to sort of separate our children from their parents and from not literally, but in terms of how we prioritize them, right? There's this idea that if we can sort of get children early and invest in them early, then they won't end up like their parents, is the sort of, soft liberal bigotry that happens so often. And I think we need to recognize that there is such a wisdom in the hardest working and most struggling families that needs to be respected and cared for. I saw polling the other day that said that the majority of Black and Brown parents want to continue some form of remote schooling. And there's so much there, right? And it's not the case with white parents. White parents are like, take these kids back, there's so much to that I think we need to unpack and really listen to about why it is that families who, often are really have few resources to be able to remote school electronically and work outside the home and all of that, would still rather have their babies close to them than send them back into a system that they don't trust. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we need to think about education and children, but think about the whole family.
There's not much more to say. Heather said practically all of it, but I'll just pick up from where she left off. My first work in this effort to overcome racism was really, my first programmatic design work really was about the relationship between the classroom teacher, who were predominantly white, and the students of color. And I got a chance to see with my own eyes how these educators were bringing their biases and their assumptions about these children into the classroom, and then imposing limited expectations and unfair discipline and all these things that are manifestations of the racial belief system and the racial hierarchy into the classroom and affecting the psychological and emotional and mental and academic development of children. So in addition to all the structural things that we have to do, we also have to do a much more effective job of preparing educators who are in those classrooms that's the magic moment when the teacher interacts with the child. And if they're going to be there 5.5, 6, 7 hours a day, then those moments have to be moments of affirmation, of a sense of belonging, and of a true, child development opportunity here. And these mothers and fathers who don't want to send their kids back to school, they understand what's at risk. And so we have that area of work that has to be done, in addition to all the things that have been named. But education is key to a viable democracy. So we have to close gaps, and we have to make sure that we are delivering a quality development and educational experience to all of our children.
That's right. I mean, even this happening right now, I was just listening to a report yesterday where educators are saying that they're getting so much pressure. Either they're being attacked by the parents, even in a virtual setting, saying, well, the other side of that is, I guess, parents have more luxury now of listening in, right, on what the teachers are passing along and all that, right or wrong. Well, most people are even more appreciative of the teachers and understand really a little bit of what now they go through and what they deal with to educate their child. But for example, if you're talking about the January 6th insurrection, the accusation is, well, you sound too pro-Trump. Or the other side is you're not being single-minded enough, and you're not looking at all the angles. I mean, it's almost like you can't win, so to your point, we have to educate the educators, but also allow them to do their work, right? History is what it is. Rewriting history is something that also continues to be done in this country. And I guess, that's also very not positive and helpful for children as they grow up and then start to ask their own questions and start to do their own research as to how things really play out and what the implications of that all are. Thank you. I wanted to transition to connection, relationship. I believe you all have a very strong relationship. And I think there's a lot that you could share because COVID or beyond, let's just face it, we all know that we need to navigate this world, this life with all the supporters that we can get, our village, whatever you want to call it. A lot of people just don't have that. Unfortunately, while they should, maybe there's people there, but there's not a connection. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice, any thoughts? And I know it's never always just, there's ups and downs in any relationship, but any advice you might have for parents out there, whether it's with their daughters, their sons, whoever, who are just looking to connect and kind of navigate this space together rather than in a friction type of situation?
Mm.
You're gonna dive into that, Heather?
Yeah, I'll start. This is funny. So I am fortunate that my mother has always given me a lot of trust and authority in my own life, and believed in me. And I think that has been very helpful to our relationship. It's very helpful to, my maturing early as a kid and being able to do a lot of things independently. And I think about now with my 2-year-old who's 2.5 and is starting to show toddler signs of, those power struggles, right? And I actually made this decision yesterday to sort of reground in giving him more control and not less, because he's now getting to the place where he wants it. And he's a really smart kid and he can handle it.
Oh, no kidding.
All right, so now I'm talking about my mother's favorite person on the planet, which is my son.
Oh, I know.
So I think that, I am happy that I received a good model of parents. Both my father and my mother really trusted me and do to this day in a way that is very empowering.
Heather, I do. Thank you for saying that. I would tell a funny story very quickly. As a grandmother, we kiss the little bump or whatever it is and make it better, and so I tried that recently with my grandson. He had his mother had trusted him and he had sort of bumped something and he was acting a little more dramatic than it was, so we were, of course, this was virtual. So I said to him, well, here, let me see it. Let Nana kiss it and make it better. And this little 2-year-old said, I don't need a kiss. I need some ice.
Very practical.
Well, okay.
Later for the kisses. I could get a lot of those. That's adorable.
So funny. But my advice to mothers, and I've been asked this question often in terms of what is the key. I think the most important thing, particularly for children of color, is to believe in them and to communicate to them their innate ability and wisdom, and so that they trust themselves. It's one thing for me to trust my children. It's another thing for them to trust themselves and trust their own judgment. I really love the definition of self-esteem. I believe it was Brandon who said years ago, self-esteem is the ability to trust your own mind to make decisions that are in your own best interest. And so I think the esteem that a child has, the trust of their own mind, is the most important gift you can give to a child, especially a child of color, where the whole world does not trust them, And so when they can stand in the face of all of these lies that would minimize and diminish their value, when they can stand in the face of that with an absolute trust of who they are, then I think they will create these opportunities, and they will not be diminished or sidetracked by the foolishness that gets projected onto them, and they will draw much, much less of it as a result.
Oh, I hope everyone's listening on that, especially the piece about even if you're not the most effective communicator. I think that's always something we all strive for, especially when the people closest and the ones you love the most. There are many other ways that you can still add that level of support. I really appreciate what you all said, trust, authority, believing in that level of esteem. You see that in kids, even at the youngest of ages. And I don't mean going over the top, right? Where people are, people just have the confidence to know, you know what, I'm going to fall and it's fine. And I'm going to move on and I'm going to learn from this. Rather, the whole world is shattering around me. I'm going to go in a corner right now. How we all deal with life really has an impact. So I appreciate that very much. You all have been on a lot of interviews. What's one of the toughest questions you ever got answered, and how did you choose to address that or avoid it?
Do you have one, Mom?
I'm thinking I should have had one. Let's see. Well, I think the toughest questions are questions about failure. And sometimes people will, just ask that question. You've been so successful, what didn't you succeed at? Where have you, not succeeded? What's been a failure in your life? And nobody wants to talk about that. So what I tend to say is, well, there've been many experiences that have taught me the lessons that I had to learn in order to evolve into a better person, And what I try to take from those learning moments, is the wisdom that they offer and move on, So that is my way of not answering the question, but answering the question.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, probably the hardest question I've ever been asked in an interview was the C-SPAN moment when I was on live television. Someone asked me, he said they were prejudiced, white male who was prejudiced, and what could I do? What advice did I have to help them to change? It's like, I don't know, and I did have to really deeply listen in that moment, both to the caller on this live show on C-SPAN and to, my inner wisdom and my higher self to be able to respond with compassion to this person who was acknowledging his prejudice and give him some ideas of what he could do to sort of integrate his life. And that's probably the hardest question I've ever gotten.
That's what I was going to bring up, but I wasn't sure for you if it was hard, because the way you handled it with such grace and poise. For anyone listening, just Google something like 8 million views. I mean, pretty phenomenal. And I think that was back in 2016. So, I mean, to still be so powerful and meaningful, especially now in this day and time we're living in, I think a lot of folks need to listen to your answer, quite frankly. I found it very thoughtful and insightful and real. So thank you for that. So as we're wrapping up, the final question, of course, I want to kind of send off here about our youth, our rising leaders, next generation, current and next generation of leaders. There's a lot of adults that are quite dismayed, quite frustrated on many levels of just how life is right now. Again, we all know this United States didn't just get created overnight. There are a lot of, deep-rooted challenges and some wonderful aspects. My father's immigrant, first generation from Nigeria. He chose to bring his family here and has been here 30, 40 years. He clearly should have, could have gone back, chose to still stay here, and many of his siblings. And that's a powerful story of many families, right? The youth, especially with the last election and a lot of polls and interviewing of folks who are just kind of like, I want to be engaged, but I just don't see where my vote matters. I'm not sure if my vote matters. I'm not sure if I'm being listened to. I don't know if my voice is resonating. So pick your topic: climate change, job creation, student loan debt, whatever. Where do we help them see the light? Everyone has a different story. Everyone has something different that kind of latches onto a passion of theirs if they're able to uncover it. But while many of our next generation are getting very frustrated and dismayed, any advice as we kind of wrap up here?
Well, this past election was one of the highest youth turnouts on record, if not the highest. And so my message would be, you did it, right? That you waded through high water to vote, to organize in this uprising summer where we saw the largest social movement in the history of the country take to the streets in counties in every corner of the nation, including 90% of them were majority white counties. So, you did it. You mobilized the largest climate strike and youth climate march in the history of the world, and were able to put over the top an administration that is committed to doing something about it. And so it is through collective action that you're going to change the world. The idea that certainly my generation was sold, that it's all up to each of us individually to make our way, and that, it's about me getting mine and me doing for myself, me getting my education, getting my job, getting my good this and good that. That is a bankrupt idea. And it's so clear, I think now more than ever, that the important things that we need in life, clean air, clean water, better pay, more secure healthcare, infrastructure that doesn't fail, during a freak storm, all of that we can't do on our own. No person can do on his or her own. We have to do it together and collectively. And that, I think, is really the wisdom and the revelation that is guiding this youngest generation, who are turning to one another for solutions, and rejecting the false idea that we can do it on our own, and realizing that we do need each other. And so more of that.
Excellent. Thank you.
The only advice I would add to that, which I was thinking about the parenting advice that you offered in terms of, or asked about the mother-daughter relationship, in addition to trust in oneself, my philosophy is very much fueled by a trust in our connection to, with, and our embodiment of the power of creation. There is a spark of the divine that lives in each of us. And America is an idea. Racism is an idea. I want young people to know that they do have the power through their imagination and their collective work to create a new idea of America, or to actualize an aspirational idea, that all are created equal, and the rest of that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this notion, this communal notion, that people from all corners of the earth, as Heather would say, can come together and be here and foster a viable democracy. This is the 21st century. If we don't do that now, when, right? And so I just want people to really believe, and young people to believe that you do have the power to create this new dispensation, to actualize this new way of being. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't say how proud and humbled I am to have a daughter who is actively doing that through her book and through her work and through her message. She is saying, and being a model, she's a young person, she's a grandmother millennial, is that what you call yourself? She's a young person that is saying and showing that it is possible to create a better way. And I think that's the message that we want to deliver.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you both so much, Gail, Heather, for who you are to each other and your family and your loved ones, and to folks like myself who are inspired. I'm already thinking a little differently, and that's what I aim for. And I know you have really shared some incredible insights and thought-provoking conversation today for our audience. So just want to thank you both, and happy early Mother's Day, about a month early or so, but looking forward to continuing to make some good trouble together with the two of you. So
thank you, Nse. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.